a spike in the number of brutal incidents involving police officers has sounded the alarm on post-traumatic stress disorder. In KwaZulu-Natal, a constable allegedly killed his 81-year-old mother with a nail. In this now on Saturday night, it's a completely separate incident. This is in the Western Cape. A former police officer, Jean-Paul Malchus, allegedly killed 3 people in a Cape Town hospital. His lawyer has since told the court that Malchus is suicidal and has severe depression. Joining me now is traumatologist Dr Antoinette Beukes, and she joins us from Langebaan. This is in the Western Cape. Dr. Beukes, thank you very much for your time. Firstly, let's begin the conversation with whether or not the cases involving police officers either turning their service pistols not only on themselves but other people surrounding them at that moment in time when they are feeling distressed, or in other instances, them just becoming violent. Does that talk to the cases of post-traumatic stress disorder for police officers being on the rise again?
Good morning to you and all the listeners. Yes, definitely. We see a rise in cases where police are turning on their family members, on other people, and on themselves. More suicides amongst police members, definitely yes.
And are there measures within the police force or the police service, as some people would prefer, are there measures within the police, Dr. Beukes, to deal with the issue of post-traumatic stress disorder? Because we know that police officers see things that we ordinary human beings would never be able to deal with.
Yes, first of all, I want to state the following. If we look at post-traumatic stress disorder, that can develop through means of a single, multiple, or complex trauma. But our police service members are exposed to daily threats, and they are exposed to horrific and terrifying incidents on a daily basis. So if we look at their type of trauma, it's more complex trauma. And then we also look at complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So complex post-traumatic stress disorder is not necessarily defined or specific provided for as a diagnostic criteria in the DSM-5 to be diagnosed, but we treat complex post-traumatic stress disorder. In the police force itself, or police service, if you want to call it that, they are social workers, they are psychologists, they can go and see them. I would actually recommend that the police service put measures in place for policemen to be daily debriefed on a daily basis, because they are exposed to car accidents, suicides, armed robberies, and etc.
Yeah.
And then they have to go home and they have to deal with all of this, and they don't necessarily have the skills or the emotional capacity to deal with this. And that is where we see how they develop post-traumatic stress disorder and complex post-traumatic stress disorder.
It's a very interesting point that you pick up on there, the daily debrief of police officers. And perhaps it leads to the question about, in the past, has the police service been able to provide adequate treatment, or if not treatment, adequate debriefing of their members, particularly as you suggest that on a daily basis this should just be a prerequisite. It should not be an option, because some people will say, I'm fine, and they will go home not knowing that they actually are in the grips of depression?
Yes, you know what, if we look at complex post-traumatic stress disorder, it's a very complex treatment as well. Sometimes, you know, policemen don't always open up. They have to stay strong for their families. They have to stay strong for the community, for the fellow workers. So they don't deal with it, and they don't always talk about it. But I think it's necessary to equip them and to give them the skills how to debrief and also, you know, some mindfulness practices where they can help themselves. Because I don't think the police force has the everything in place to help all these policemen who is traumatized on a daily basis. And we must always also remember that police members are under a daily constant threat in South Africa. So the moment they put that uniform on, they are in a constant threat. So that means that they are also in a constant mode of hypervigilance.
Yeah.
So they are in a constant mode of fight and flight. So I think it's necessary for them to get the necessary help.
Yeah.
But it's not available as such, because I mean, if you look at the police force and you look at the professional help, we need more counselors and social workers and psychologists.
And Dr. Beukes, you speak as though you are someone who, I suppose, monitors what happens within the police force. I'm merely speculating here, but what do we know about the kinds of resources that are poured into the police service to try and deal specifically with PTSD? Because I suspect this might be one of those that are dealt with. It's somewhere down the food chain. It's not perhaps at the levels it should be, because in the main, people will be fighting for salary increases. There is talk, for example, just a while ago that the police management structures were perhaps too big. Instead, what we needed, or what is needed, is for police officers to be more on the ground. So there are those issues that are high up the food chain. And so when you start dealing with matters that affect individual police officers as to their health and their performance at work, perhaps that falls by the wayside. What do we know about the kinds of resources that are poured into this?
Well, the resources are very limited within the police service itself. I see police members or members from the police service on a weekly basis in my practice, where they will tell you the resources are limited. They make use of their medical aids and the medical funds to reach out for help. And it's sometimes more the women, the spouses that will phone you and say, my husband needs help. Can you please help him? He refuses to go and see the psychologist within the police force. So I can recall a couple of years ago that it was noted in their files that they have seen a psychologist, and sometimes they were victimized because of that. I found that as well.
Why is that? Because they would be perceived as being weak?
Yes. And when it comes to tasks given, they will be left out, and they will feel left out, and they will feel victimized. So I think it's important for the police service to maybe look into that as well. How can we empower them? How can we help them to help themselves? and to put the necessary resources out there for them to debrief on a daily basis or to debrief on a weekly basis. It's important to debrief. If we go and look at unresolved post-traumatic stress disorder, this might have a prolonged negative effect on all your relationships at home, your relationships at work, your family relationships.
Yeah.
We also see more addictive behaviors developing, depression. They struggle with cognitive functioning. And I think that is also why they are sometimes left out when it comes to tasks. Because they are struggling with cognitive functioning. They can't remember well, or they struggle to concentrate and to focus. We also see more anxiety and panic attacks. Like I said previously, they are in a state of hypervigilance, this constant state of fight and flight mode. We also see more mood disorders. And in the dysregulation of emotions, they are unable to control their emotions. They get anger outbursts and uncontrollable behavior. And when we look at uncontrollable behavior, that is when they turn a gun to their family, or to, like what happened at Somerset Hospital on Sunday night.
Final
that
question
is
to you,
uncontrollable behavior.
Final question to you, Doc. We know that the police service is made up of men and women. I don't know whether it is possible to sub-categorize this. Is there a way for you to be able to tell us whether the male police officers are the ones who are most resistant to seeing treatment or to seeing a specialist, a psychologist, versus their female counterparts? You've already made that clear on the part of the male police officer to say the wife will be the one that often calls to say, my husband needs help. But what about the female officers? Are they more keen to see specialists?
That is actually a very interesting question. I see more males in my practice than females. Because the women or the spouses or the family tend to reach out and get help if they see something is not right, or the family member has addiction problem or uncontrollable behavioral problems. But if we look at the statistics, 5.2% women tend to have PTSD, or more women have PTSD than males. So it's because they don't talk as well. They have to be strong for their family, their children, their husband, their work, their colleagues, their friends. So if I see men in my practice, they tend to talk more. They're more talkative. But what I also want to say is not everyone wants to talk, and that's why we have different treatments for PTSD. Someone who doesn't like to talk is not going to find any benefit from cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yeah.
And that is where we do specialized therapy, and also with complex PTSD. We do EMDR, so it's eye movement desensitization reprocessing. We are not a lot of therapists in South Africa who are qualified in EMDR. And I wish there could be more, because the outcome thereof is so good. So it's to desensitize the trauma, and they don't need to talk a lot.
Yeah.
So yeah, if I can recommend anything, I would say for people to find support, families to find support for your family member who's in the police force. Or if you are in the police force and you are listening, find help, find support, practice mindfulness, do journaling. It decreases the symptoms like flashbacks and intrusive thoughts and nightmares and so on, and join a support group. It can be at SADAC, the South African Depression and Anxiety Group. Find a therapist who is familiar with PTSD and specializes in trauma. And then, there are numerous call centers who also assist in counseling if you don't want to go and see someone within the police force.